Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Final Sector. This is our F1 mid-season podcast. We're going to be covering the first half of the season, kind of just as a general, what we thought and where we think it's going to be going for the second half of the season. We're also going to be covering a lot of other big news topics that have been happening that we haven't really talked about because I knew this was coming up, but there's a lot of stuff to talk about. Plus some silly season talk as well, which it is silly season, so you kind of have to expect that. I guess we'll just get straight into it. So much to cover. But Kyle, you are still in Mexico. You're leaving tomorrow, I think you said. But how have you seen the season so far? Do you think it's been a good season? Where do you see it heading? Just a very general overview question. How have you seen it?
Yeah, it's been super enjoyable. I think, the fact we're still here, we're recording, we've, hit every episode so far means obviously we're enjoying it. I'm enjoying it. It has been off for a while now, so it's nice to look ahead and know that, in a little over a week's time, we've got some more racing. But it's very exciting. We may not have that battle at the top that we might have hoped for, but the fact that P2 in both the drivers and the constructors, is even more unclear than it was after the first race, I think means we've got plenty to talk about here and still plenty to look forward to as fans of the sport. So I'm excited to talk about it all, and I'm excited to get racing underway again soon too.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess the way I've kind of structured this, I sent you my notes before. I've been amassing these for, I don't know, the last month or something. There's a lot to cover, but I've kind of got it separated into the first half is where we just talk about the season recaps and the talking points and who we think's done well, who we think's under pressure, just a lot of the chat around that, and then we'll move on to more the futuristic stuff, so the stuff that has been talked about that'll be coming up either in the second half of the year or for 2024 and beyond. But
indeed,
most of this is just going to be, at least for this first bit, is just talking about which teams we think have excelled, which teams have fallen behind, the sort of storylines that have kind of happened, because there's been big storylines and they've shifted quite a lot, even just in half a year of a season.
A lot of
I feel
unexpected storylines, right?
Yeah,
exactly. A lot of
yeah.
Things that have kind of come up, and now we can look at them all in hindsight and go, all these things happened, but what does it mean now we've had half the year? So.
Yeah, for sure. But we'll start with the big one at. I say it's one of the big ones. I think Red Bull and AlphaTauri, I'm going to kind of lump them in as kind of a group, because I feel like you kind of have to, just because the way the storyline is sort of panning out, it does involve both of those teams. Yes. So, starting with the first big question that I had, and this is, you can answer this legitimately, or you can kind of joke about it, but do we think that Red Bull will actually win every race this season? They've had such a dominant start. It just seems like every time a team, we'll talk about McLaren and, we'll talk about Aston and Mercedes and that a bit later on, but every time it feels like a team, they're coming back and they're getting a bit closer. It's just like, but the Red Bull's still always one or two steps ahead. It doesn't matter how much another team catches up. They're just out in front, and their reliability has been like incredible as well. So I find it hard to believe that they just won't win every race. It just seems like they're just going to do it. It's just an inevitability. But I'm curious if you think that it will last, or if you think the second half of the season will throw some things up.
Now, the simplest answer is to say with every car finishing the race without any significant issues, right? There's no way that they lose at this point, right?
Yeah.
It would have to take either, a really, really big accident, which, I guess it would need a big accident to take out one car, and even Checo, on those days when Max has been taken out, he's kind of been there, even if he's not always been there. So it's not also to say that, it's got to be Max up there, but without some divine intervention from the gods, something blowing up, one of those cases where we've seen, in these dominant seasons in the past where reliability has played into it. Without that, you wouldn't be able to bet on it, right? We even joke in our predictions to say for the second half of the year, we each have to pick a race which we think Red Bull will expire and not get the podium for, just to the fact it hasn't happened yet, you can't say, it's more likely to happen, but as the year does go on, as some parts start to go through the same cycles, it is more likely. But the fact of their track record so far with their reliability and how their main driver is doing thus far, Max, I'd be surprised to find an argument where you could pick a track that, a team looks like they could legitimately beat them, AK like Brazil last year, for example, as an example. You just don't see it happening at this point at all. So
yeah, agreed. I think, like you say, I think it definitely requires some kind of like either crash or, the second half of the season is generally where you start to see the reliabilities pop up.
A lot more engine penalties and everything like that start coming in too. And that's because people are running low, stretching things thin, realizing we're not going to make it. So
yeah, and we've already seen, Max has taken a penalty for a new gearbox. It was, only the 5, but it didn't end up mattering.
No,
it's.
That's why I'm hesitant to say a penalty. Like even a penalty,
exactly.
It needs to be a breakdown or a bad crash, right?
Which
always can happen. So that's why we just got to say, look, I think it still has a chance, of course, but anything outside of that, they're not going to legitimately be beaten on raw pace. I can't see how,
Yeah. I think the only thing that the curveball I will throw in there, Christian Horner's basically said over the mid-season break that's basically it in terms of their upgrades. They're pretty much entirely focusing on the 2024 car now, which obviously makes a lot of sense because they've, at this point, basically locked down both championships. It would take a miracle for anyone to get even close to beating Max or Red Bull. So it makes sense that they've completely shifted to the 2024 car. But in saying that, if I know Mercedes, I think Toto's just come out the last couple of days and said they're basically focusing on the 2024 car as well because they want to go back to, they don't want to just fight for the P2. They want to focus on getting back to number one. They've been very vocal about that, obviously. So, but, McLaren and if Aston Martin can find their way back and Ferrari obviously want to prove that they're still quite up there as well. If they do continue to develop through the rest of the 2024 season, there is at least a chance that they can close that gap a little bit. So I think there's still a little bit of hope, but it's like a tiny sparkle in the distance that you might be able to reach, but you have to really stretch your arm out to grab it. But
I think what it'll come down to is if any of those teams, which we'll go into a few of them next, so this is almost a good segue, right?
Sure.
If some of those teams know that hardcore continuing to develop this year will cover 90% of their design for next year, then there's less of a risk going for it. As you say, Toto's come out and almost said that they've already had to switch because they know that they need a lot of time to almost, go back to a baseline and switch to something brand new.
True.
Something they know is not worth, A, trying to get done this year, so therefore B, they shouldn't develop this year's design anymore in the, more limited design space you have. So if the likes of Ferrari, McLaren, I guess McLaren could be a big one here, right? Yeah. And Aston say, well, we're actually still going to go guns blazing and switch far later because we're basically going to be running the same car next year, then there might be something there. There's always a few changes, and I guess you get more of a bigger development aero research spend for the next year. So it's not like, Red Bull switching early means they're going for a brand new concept, right? It's not necessarily that. But it just means the other teams could potentially sacrifice a little bit of gain next year if, the likes of McLaren think, let's go all in to try to get P2, because even if we start next year a little behind, a P2 this year would look absolutely incredible, right? For our drivers and for everything. Yep. So I can see them and Aston maybe taking a while. Ferrari, I think, is a question mark because they did change a bit. Who knows if they're also going to go, we're going to scrap it again, right? You could see it, or you could also see them doubling down. So it could lead things to be closer. Again, it's also going to make that P2 really interesting, right? I think the big one, as we'll get into, is McLaren. They're behind the rest of the best, but really you could see them, smashing it out and overtaking the rest of their rivals aside from Red Bull. Is that the path they're going to take? Is Aston going to, almost say, we had a smashing start, but this is a long-term project. Let's put this on ice for this year and actually focus on next year as well. Focus on, the title or even more solid P2 next year. I don't know, man. There's you can keep going on this with those teams, regardless of everyone else behind. It's tricky. yeah, definitely. I think you're right about McLaren and Aston definitely. Like, Aston have obviously talked up their 5-year plan, and this is the first year where you've finally seen, they weren't talking complete garbage, because I was a very big doubter. It wasn't Alpine or Renault talk, was it?
Yes, that's that. We'll get onto that. That's a bit later. But yeah, at least they showed up at the first, the start of this season. They're like, oh, the second fastest car, and they were at the time. And I think if they somehow manage to get their act together for the second half of the season, and then also fight for that P2, that'd be huge for Aston Martin as well, to prove and say, you know what, it wasn't just a whole lot of talk, and we've actually put our money where our mouth is, and pushed
for the longer term, right? Not
exactly.
just a flash in the pan.
Exactly, yeah. So, but I want to bring it back to the Red Bull AlphaTauri,
yes,
because obviously we did mention it very briefly. Obviously, we have Ricciardo in for De Vries, and Ricciardo's basically just come out flying. I feel like I still think Tsunoda is a lot more comfortable there at the moment. You kind of half expect that. I think even though a lot of the people in Red Bull and AlphaTauri, like in the management side of it, are basically like, Ricciardo needs to come in and basically be beating Tsunoda immediately. I think that's unrealistic. I think at least getting a couple of races and see, at least showing that he's more or less there with Tsunoda, probably just slightly behind. I think Tsunoda being in that car, obviously the first half of the year, does help quite a lot, but I think it's promising signs for Ricciardo coming straight into that team. He does look a lot happier. He looks refreshed. He looks a better driver than he was at McLaren. So, I'm curious to see how he goes over sort of a longer stretch of time, now that he's got the almost that honeymoon period off, where he's like, he had those 2 races and then a break, and now he's in it for the next, whatever, how many races we've got till the end of the season. I'm curious to see how he does over that long stretch, again, getting into a rhythm, and whether he can continue that form. But it leads into, which I might even leave a lot of this conversation until we get to the silly season talks and the 2024 lineup stuff, because I think that's probably all related to that. But just to kind of preface before we move on to, I guess we'll talk about McLaren next, but before we move on to that, Helmut Marko and Christian Horner basically come out and said that, like, Ricciardo is almost certainly looking at that Red Bull seat, and they're obviously not going to take Max's seat away. So, there's Perez there. It's so hard to read what they're trying to do with Perez, whether or not they're happy. It's very obvious. It's a number 1, number 2 driver sort of team. A lot of other teams, it's kind of real murky. But
yeah, they've set up something they can let cook here. I think they've moved a few chess pieces, right? Where they've moved De Vries out the way, partly I think just because I think when you look at how many juniors they've got, and juniors actually doing really well this year, I guess including Ricciardo almost in that bucket as well.
Yeah.
Whether who they should have gone with, that's another conversation, right? But irrespective, they did, as this year progressed on, went, wow, there's a lot of guys that could have done well there in F2, in Super Formula, etc. But I think with what they're set up now, they've got a good kind of pot just to let cook till the end of the year. They've got, as you say, Ricciardo coming back, who looks like he's already had a bit of flash of brilliance, but Tsunoda also looks like he's doing quite well. He's keeps snatching up those last few points pretty consistently, which you'd say is a pretty big turn of form.
Definitely.
And you wouldn't say it's because that car actually should be coming second. It's just that Tsunoda's poor. I think few people are saying that. There's a reason there's some movements in management in that team. There's a reason there's been some pretty harsh words coming out of management between departments, right? That doesn't happen, if just your driver's doing poor. So I think it'll be interesting, to see how this Yuki Ricciardo thing goes. But
Definitely.
also, it's obviously they've now got a bit of a backup that even if it's next year, mid next year, end next year, which seems more likely, that if Ricciardo does perform, they seem to still be he hasn't said it, but I think he's kind of not disagreed with it per se. So that could be something that comes out where if Perez falters, or I guess if Ricciardo performs better, then, they'll see how they go. But they've almost set it up where this year, they don't need to decide. Like, Perez obviously knows what's going on. Yeah. Ricciardo knows what's going on. They've still got, 11 races this year to actually, try sharpen both their pencils to see what they can do. And if, they all fall off for some reason, well, they've got a few rookies they could take an absolute chance on.
Yeah.
So I think they've put a few things in place to let it cook. They've got, as we say, some other changes being made. So, we're not going to get some instant results, I think, but it's certainly something where each weekend you're going to, be looking at a few different people going, how have they all done? Where do we rank them so far? And we're going to see how that goes. So
yeah, for sure.
That'll be interesting to follow.
Yeah, definitely. But we'll leave, I've got a few more notes here, but we'll leave that till a little bit later. Let's move on to McLaren. You obviously talked about their huge rise to basically the second fastest car at the moment.
The Rise V2, second team to just rise.
It's incredible, and it happened so quickly. It happened over the course of like 1 or 2 races, and then it's like,
It was 2 weekends.
Yes,
Austria was the teaser.
Yeah, yep.
Great Britain was, the confirmer, and the races after that have just been further confirmation.
Yep, yeah, exactly. So I mean, the question that I had here is, can they fight Max at the top? And this goes back to my previous point. It's like if they do continue to develop that car, if they continue in this trajectory, they've obviously found with the upgrade package that they've taken, it was quite a big one. So I don't expect any big upgrades if they are going to take any.
Was kind of there.
Yeah. Yes, I wouldn't expect it for a while, but if they can continue to develop, if they can close that gap even more, particularly in, we saw at Spa as well. One of the qualifyings with whether it's for the sprint or the actual qualifying, I don't recall, but Max was like nearly a second ahead, but one of the other qualifyings was incredibly close. It was, within, half a tenth, basically, with Piastri behind. It must have been the sprint. I mean, that shows how close it can be. And if Red Bull have basically said, hey, we have no more upgrade packages, like they'll take little ones here and there, track-specific stuff, like, that every team does. But in terms of big upgrades, like they're done. If McLaren are like, hey, we want to push to maybe even fight for a win here, or at least give ourselves a chance, and they start bringing, they bring another big update package sort of later in the year. Do you see that being a possibility of them fighting for that P1, or do you think that's maybe they should be a bit more realistic and say, hey, let's focus on next year as well, now that teams like Red Bull and Mercedes are sort of moving in that direction?
I guess they've got a chance, right? Like, we've seen that McLaren seems to work with a number of different setups. The Red Bull can as well, but it seems a little harder to get up to speed.
Yep.
And we've also seen in, a few race starts now, both the McLaren drivers aren't afraid to get their elbows out. Now, Max can generally breeze past in some regard, but as the year goes on, if there's a weekend, that McLaren, for both drivers, they're still probably able to get a little more out of it. This is a massive change. You're not going to suddenly understand how to get the most out of it after one or two races, right? Maybe in 1 week of the off season where they're, all working, they can, have a look and see, all right, we raced it, 3 very different tracks with 3 completely different car configurations. They could still get a ton of performance there. So I think your one golden ticket, for McLaren would be to say, they get that weekend where they're just straight on it. Maybe somewhere like Singapore, where it's a little harder to overtake, where wear's a little more of a problem. I know Max is getting a god at that, but there is every chance of Red Bull get it a little off and McLaren get it a little on. Whether they're going to double down and really focus on that for this year, I don't know, right? I could see them doing that to try and get a win, especially when both their drivers, I guess, which is the next bit to talk about McLaren, are doing so well. And if, that they have Norris, who's, been their star, but Piastri so far is showing, immense talent after half a year, being off of F1 for a year, working for a completely different team. And yet he's already, really showing the likes that we saw at Norris when he first joined.
Yeah.
So they could go either way. I guess I'm not going to bet on it, but you'd still hope that McLaren, pinching at the heels for any sort of mistake from Red Bull. And if they do make it, they're going to latch onto it and hopefully get something out of it. Yeah,
definitely. And like you say, with Norris and Piastri both performing, I mentioned this in previous recordings as well, but with it's not uncommon for a team that starts to rise and you have the rookie driver in, or the newer driver in there sort of gets left behind for a little bit, while the star driver in Norris in this instance sort of takes off ahead, and they get all the points and the podiums and the accolades and whatever, all the results from the big upgrade because they're able to be on it straight away, and the rookie driver sort of falls behind.
And they're a lot more adaptable to potentially a big change, right?
Yeah, exactly.
In Norris's case,
but in this instance, Piastri has been the second that car's been quick, he's been just as close to Norris as he's always been, which is it's incredible. Like, he's shown that he can adapt to that as well, and as you say,
exactly.
He can get his elbows out, and he's not afraid to, regardless of what happened when he was when he got that DNF in Spa. It shows that he's not afraid to go for those moves as well. Like,
well, yeah, the point was because he was trying to get his elbows out,
yes,
and try something, which is, I think we said and everyone else said at the time, you couldn't blame.
Yeah,
and it's I was just gonna say, I saw a really interesting article title earlier, which basically was called Norris leads the way at McLaren but can't afford to ignore potential of Piastri. I'm like, I like how that's worded.
Yeah.
Not that there should be any kind of threat there, but of course, McLaren's always kind of rallied behind, Norris is their golden boy, but I guess there's a conversation to say if they've got two golden boys, does that change things up a bit? Hopefully they can actually, utilize them both to do something amazing. But
true.
It's
we've seen that that relationship sort of tank before in a team. So let's see where that one goes.
Max and Daniel Ricciardo, right?
Yep.
Don't need to look that far back.
No, very true. I'm very curious to see if McLaren can keep that up, because I think that'd be, as you say, with having two drivers up there fighting for those podiums as well, that makes it really, really, I wouldn't be surprised to see McLaren finish P2 in the championship at the end of the year, even though they're P4, P5 or something at the moment. Like, they're not.
Essentially, they're behind the train because they started late.
Yes.
But they end the season almost looking, as we say, the most adaptable.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. But I guess we'll move on to Aston as well.
One of their rivals, right? Yes, that's the other side where started very strong. It's interesting how you evaluate how they ended, because no one in the team seems to say they ended weak. It may be that they underestimated the performance games some of the other teams would had, right? You don't hear the drivers kind of coming out saying, "Oh, the car was horrible. Oh, we made mistakes." I guess we'll get into the drivers in a second, because that's obviously a big point of this, and something we've talked about before when reviewing seats, drivers, etc. And when Aston may need to change things is a bit of a, something we might be leading towards here. But at least both of them seem to be saying, look, there was nothing wrong with the car. We were just driving it, but we could have made a bit of, different decisions. But, you could say, oh, well, it looks like they're struggling a bit. They're not going to pick it up. But then again, they were the team that came out of nowhere that were challenging, Max at the start of the year. So there's no reason they couldn't take some time off and just figure it out, and make a little bit of a jump again. They're not that far behind, right?
Yeah.
Given that top is so close, the difference between P2, P3 or P9, P10 can sometimes be, a tenth of a second a lap. And sometimes that can, flip you completely around depending how Ferrari, Mercedes, now McLaren are doing. So
definitely.
I wouldn't be doubtful of them. I think I'd still give them a few more races to say, look, I think they've had a bit of a wake-up call, and that's what they were saying, at the end of particularly at the Belgian Grand Prix, where they thought they might have caught up a bit.
Yep.
But, when we say that, we're almost saying, well, let's see what, Alonso can do to recover, right? It's still now, Alonso's still sitting there, I think, P2 or P3 in the Drivers' Championship, right?
Yep.
Even though that car's falling behind, and then Stroll is, of course, nowhere near there. And I remember we've said this when we always talked about our driver predictions. We said that, look, while Aston's position doesn't really matter, they're not really going to be forced to change Stroll around. As soon as he maybe costs them 1 to 2 places, that's when they'll have to look at it. And you can already see,
fruition.
I know Alonso's had this strong start. If Stroll had his strongest start, they should probably still have P2, in the constructors pretty confidently, if not slip back a little bit, even if their performance slips. But they'd have built that solid buffer at the start. But then they had one driver building that buffer, so now they might just fall back, not even through, Stroll's fault. It'd be the same if Red Bull, fighting a really close title, and back when we had that close title with 2 years ago, if Checo hadn't pulled his weight, it would have been points his fingers at Checo, right? But he did his bit there. We're almost seeing less weight on it here, but Stroll could be the reason they lose up to 2 positions, which is massive for their brand, their credit, tells a completely different story for their comeback when you look at the history. So do we do we think he can pick it up?
Yeah.
What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, before I get into what I think about that, the one thing that I think is pretty telling that I don't think they don't even really know themselves. They had I think this was I was gonna say it must have been after Canada. It was it was a few races ago where they did start slipping back, and the team principal Mike Crack basically said that their new season target is like 4th or 5th in the constructors, and they're currently sitting 3rd. So yeah, I have actually got that note here. So they're 3rd in the constructors, still probably just behind Mercedes, but they were targeting 4th and 5th just after a few bad races. And I was sitting there. He has since changed his tune a little bit. But after reading that comment, I was just like, that's like you were a comfortable P2 for, the first 10 races. You were comfortable P2 and you're like, now we can fight for 4th or 5th. And it's like, bro, what are you talking about? Like, how have you got it so wrong? I know they've talked about how they brought an upgrade package that sort of sent them in the wrong direction. And that just goes to show, I guess, how much that can, just getting one update package wrong, how drastically that can affect your season, right? Like completely change their expectations for where they're going to end up. And I think he since has come out and basically said after Spa, where they saw a little bit of an upturn in performance again, that they can still fight for that P2. They think they figured out, where they were losing all that pace, and they're hoping to come back a bit stronger. And he says he's at least somewhat confident that they can do that, or at least try for that. So I think that kind of goes to show that, in the space of 2 or 3 races, they've gone from, oh, we're fighting for 4th or 5th, and then they're like, oh no, we can still fight for P2, and it's like, well, which one is it? Like, I don't.
That's what I'm saying. I think we have to wait a few more to see.
Yeah,
I don't think they're even sure. I don't think they're going to crisis mode, but I think we need a few more races than after a break to see where everyone lines up a little clearer. For
sure, but I do. You're very much right about Stroll. I think Stroll, he's had in a couple of races, you do see his racecraft, and he's able to make some of these amazing overtakes and these fights through the field, and and he can do it. He just does it just not regularly enough, and a lot of the time it's fighting from way at the back to maybe score a couple of points, and then he still ends up he still ends up behind Alonso at the end of the race anyway, despite the fact that he's fought back 8-9 places, and it's like correct, but you're still 3 or 4 places behind Alonso. Yeah, exactly. So it's like they have. I'm just trying to we'll talk about this in a bit as well, but it's like who do they replace Stroll with if they've got Drugovich in there. Drugovich won the F2 season last year. Would they just put him in for Stroll? I don't really
think they'd need to put in a rookie that they would then be looking to train up the next 4 or 5 years, right?
I suppose so.
They know that Alonso, although he's good, doesn't have infinite time on his shoulders.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
And even if he did, they'd still want someone solid to at least finish slightly behind him. So whether they think, Drugovich in the background is still fine. I haven't heard too much from him.
That's my thing.
Nothing is bad, but it's not like we follow that driver testing feedback too close. It's only really when these drivers get roped into a seat, you start to hear rumors and people going, oh, we've heard that he's really good in the feedback, in the simulator and stuff. That was part of the credit for Ricardo. Was they said in the simulator, hey, this guy looks pretty stinking good. So
yeah, true.
That's when that came up in that topic for De Vries. So yeah, it's obviously not something they're going to pick by the end of the year, but I'd say it would be hard for anyone to ignore, even Stroll and all his backers, of course, are going to look and go, well, this costs you clearly 2 places. That's massive, right? And they can't look past that.
You want to hope not.
Again, I think something else we're going to have to follow towards the end of the year, right? So, there's a reason we said that the second half of this year is going to have a lot of storylines still to play out, and that's one of them.
Definitely.
Both how are Aston going to do, but how is Stroll going to do? So
yep, yeah, 100%.
I'm sure he knows this is time to perform.
Yeah, I think he has to at this point. But the only other, before we get on to Alpine, the only other team I guess I really had notes on is which I've kind of already talked about most of this stuff. But Mercedes, they obviously want to keep fighting for those podiums. They're pretty realistic, saying they don't really think there's a chance for a race win there, but they think they can still consistently fight for podiums. And as I said a couple of days ago, Toto's basically said they've completely switched focus to that 2024 car. So I think their car is good enough to secure that P2, but I do think they still need to be a little bit worried about if like you say, if Aston come back, if McLaren come through, there is a very good chance that they could drop back a couple of places if they're not careful. And the other point you alluded to earlier is the fact that because they're switching so early, or the reason they're switching so early is because they want to make these fundamental design changes to the car. So they kind of have to start early to avoid what happened. The last time they had to make a fundamental design change, and how that all ended up. If anyone who's been watching for the last 2 years knows, you'll know that they were very stubborn in changing their car design. And it took the drivers basically saying, "Hey, change the car," and then they did, and then they were competitive again. So I think it's probably wise of them to start a bit early. But I don't know if you see anything else from Mercedes. I don't think they've got. It's not like McLaren where I see them really fighting for that win. I think they'll just have a car that'll probably come home sort of P2, P3 in the championship, and then try. No, and put
exactly. I think if on a day where Red Bull falters, Mercedes is definitely one of the top contenders to put your money on to try and grab it. Right, that's what they were known for. Last year and still this year, just trying to pick up the safe positions.
Yep.
But it's clear why they're saying we're going to switch next year. I guess the only other point, which I suppose does more touch on future things, is Hamilton and his future. I know every year we get to this point where we'll start talking about it, talk about other teams, but he still sounds like he's very committed to this project. If he wasn't, he's a guy he's pretty open to speak his mind, vocal, right? It's like Alonso. If Alonso's not happy, he starts speaking his mind immediately. 3 years before he leaves the team. Hamilton's very similar here. He still sounds committed as George is going to be. So they're still going to give it their all as drivers, and of course. If they're going to put all their marbles in for next year, both drivers are going to see that out as well. Yeah, so.
Definitely. Yeah, I guess that brings up a good point, the Hamilton v Russell chat as well, how you've seen that. Because, they were always quite close, particularly when they were in that sort of rebuild process. There was talk that, hey, Russell's actually faster than Hamilton. And, we obviously had talked about how everyone was like hyping up Russell as being faster than Hamilton, and
it's Sainz Leclerc all over again.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And then it's like once they start getting, we made the point, it's like once they start getting competitive, we think that Hamilton has that extra edge. It's kind of the point. It's kind of at that point. I feel like we're seeing now that they have a car that is. It's not. It's not fighting for wins or anything, but it is a hell of a lot more competitive than they were. And you are seeing that Hamilton does have that edge over Russell, at least on a consistent basis. Russell has his moments where he can put it ahead of Hamilton and get those better results. But on the whole, Hamilton is the faster driver. It's obviously not cause for concern at all for.
It's no detriment to Russell, as we say. He's still fine. Yes. He's still, we forget how experienced Hamilton is, and Hamilton had, many years of being very quick, but also a lot of learning and growing to do. So Russell's still, been amazing, and you wouldn't say this is any concern for him. But you're right at a time where that split second, move, extra tenth in qualifying, extra trick in the pit lane that Hamilton might be able to pull out. Those scenarios are going to come up more, and that's where we might see him, shine a little more, right?
Yeah.
But that's no detriment to Russell, as I say, at all. They're similar to McLaren. They've got two bloody good drivers that will take every chance they get, and that's also why I think that fight, between those two teams is going to be amazing. Because they've both got two, very different but very strong cars with two very different but very strong drivers. So,
it's a very good point, actually. Yeah, so. Like I said, I don't think it's cause for concern at a Mercedes at all. No. I think Russell is, he's come out and there was a lot of conversation about with Russell sort of dropping back. how he's performing against Hamilton, given how he had performed in the past against him. And he's basically saying they're probably the teammates who are, the closest to each other on pace. And at the time, I actually went and sort of researched that very, very briefly. I'm just
Yes.
I'll just have a quick look and just see how true that is. And it's outside of Bottas Joe, I'm yeah, he's probably right. They probably are the closest in terms of performance, in terms of teammates. So it's I don't know. The media and just people in general just like to kick up. It's like drama.
Well,
I don't
of
really.
Course, and it's Mercedes, and it's Hamilton kind of race. So of course they're gonna do it.
Yeah,
but yeah. It's there's no cause for concern there. And as I say, I think it's just gonna fuel them both to do as best as they can to round out this year and in preparation for next year, right?
Definitely. Well, let's move on to Alpine, because this is the fun one. Fun depending on who you are, I guess. It could be very devastating if you're an Alpine fan, I suppose. What's happening at Alpine, Carl? What's happening? Because I don't know anymore.
They are trying to restructure again. It seems like
that's funny. I feel like I've heard that story before.
I know.
Yeah.
This is kind of all started back when we had even Prost leave a while ago, and he was supposed to come in to really oversee as an advisor, similar to Lauda did for Mercedes, right? To see a refresh, a restructure, mentor the drivers, the team, etc. But he left a few years ago, basically citing he disagreed with the management structure and it didn't really work. He didn't see it work as an operation, but he didn't see it work for himself. That's why he left, right? But it still could have worked. They had a lot of change. They, of course, did the whole Alpine rebrand and moved a few people. They brought in, Otmar, which was a pretty big move. They seemed to start all right, but it was overshadowed by the fact that Aston made such a big jump, right? If Aston hadn't made that jump, I still think their performances, which we saw in Melbourne before the incident, looked pretty damn strong.
Yep.
But, of course, it was in context of saying, well, but Aston did it, right? Why were they able to do it? Where they're trying to follow the same plan as us, and we couldn't do it, right? Even having a bit of a head start of them in terms of planning, funding, capital, etc. With two drivers, you'd still say the drivers, for the most part, I'd say are still performing pretty well when everything gets together.
Yeah, I think they've got a pretty strong driver lineup, honestly.
Yes. Strongest lineup they've had for a while in terms of both drivers.
Yep.
At least of how they're performing. But yeah, then it kind of came out over, I think it was the Spa weekend, right? Where it was midway through the weekend, they said, oh, by the way, 3 top people are leaving. And those 3 top people seemed pretty pissed about it.
Yep.
Which never sounds good. And then there was oh, and our head of drivers, I don't remember who it was that stepped in because I don't remember now, but it was some guy that already had 3 roles who's going to cover the 4th role in the meantime. And it's well, they've made the decision to change it around and they don't have a replacement in the meantime. So it's almost obviously something's gone down for them to make a preliminary change where for the next few races they're going to be hurting because they're missing management people, and all those people that are leaving are kind of saying this is a dog's breakfast. And this is off the back of Alonso leaving, saying this is a dog's breakfast, of Piastri obviously having no faith in them.
Yes.
And you see both of those drivers doing as well. You go, ooh, the team does seem like it's still doing fine. They're still able to actually punch in there and do a bit. But when everyone else now seems to be finding their footing ahead of them, they're going to do nothing but fall backwards, when the rest of the teams Alfa Romeo, etc., maybe, start to get something together. So yeah, it's going to be real, because it happened all before the break, so now it's gone quiet.
Yeah.
I think we're all going to rock up at the Netherlands Grand Prix and say, who's running the team here? There's going to be a lot of talk about it. Everyone's going to be saying, what's going on? Who have you got running today? Who's driving your car today? I don't know.
Who knows? Yeah, it changes, feels like every race. As you mentioned, we had Otmar and Alan Permain. And Alan Permain, I think he was been there for 30 years. They both left the team, quote unquote, amicably, but as we know, it wasn't amicably. They
fired,
yes.
Multiple
fired, but possibly with some kind of payout. So that's what they mean by amicably. And then we had Pat Fry, who's another big name in the paddock, who moved to Williams. He was convinced to go over to the Williams project. And there's been some rumors that Mattia Binotto is going to take over at Alpine. I don't know how true all that is, but it is something. But yeah, I don't really know what to think of Alpine. I feel like, well, I do want to think about Alpine. I feel like they're like upper, like high management. I'm not talking about like the people who run the F1 team. I'm talking about the people a lot higher than that. I'm talking about like the CEO and shit. Like these people are so unrealistic with their expectations, and that's what all these, Otmar and all these. Cyril Abiteboul, I think, has come out and made some comments as well, because he was obviously Renault before he got pushed out. They have all these expectations to be complete. At least Aston were like realistic, like we were talking about them earlier. And they were, 3 years into their 5-year plan. You're like, well, they're not seeing many results. They're going to have to do something soon. And then they get to year 4, and it's like, oh, there it is. They were realistic about how long it was going to take for them to make any sort of gains. And it feels like Alpine, it's like, if they're not there in like a year and a half, it's like, we've got to restructure again, like something's wrong. And it's like, well, no, you've just not given them enough time. You're not giving them the right environment to do it.
Was saying it's a multi-year thing. We even talked about this when we talked about, I think, the new rule set. Yes. We were talking about our driver prediction for this year or the year prior, where we said they're picking drivers that they're hopefully going to hold for a few years, as well as changing some management around, some structure, to get a solid baseline in the new rules, the new structure, the cost cap structure. So then you can set up, excuse me, so you can set up a plan to then execute and perform well, and improve every year. And we've seen that kind of come through with, even arguably McLaren now seem to be showing part of that. And of course, Aston is showing that. Mercedes are struggling a bit, but it's not like they've been doing nothing. They've been making some pretty rapid changes. They're still in a good position to make those changes. Ferrari seems to have that potential. You'd probably argue, behind Alpine, they've also got a bit to work out.
And I think
Alpine.
I think their management is very similar to Alpine in that they're a bit impatient. So I think there's some comparisons to be made there. But
100%. But at least they're still performing well enough. But yeah, Alpine is still bridging that middle gap, right?
Yeah.
And this just seems like a decision that's going to reset all that when everyone else is now showing the fruits of their labor. Yeah. So you go, it's the worst. It's not like they're doing it, everyone else is doing it like they did 2 years ago. We went, right, they restructure now, and if they're happy with it, good. Wait 3 years, see your results. But now 2 years in, they're going, nah, we got to scrap it again when everyone else is doing it right. And you go, that's not good. No. Does that mean they're going to be last next year? What's going on?
Yeah, it's pretty dire.
Starting the 5-year plan again.
Yeah, it's dire. Like, when the CEO basically comes out and says things like, when they're getting podiums, it's like, okay, this is now the new benchmark. And it's like, well, this is now the new standard. Like, now we have to be getting podiums all the time. And, they're making comments like, we want to be, I don't know if you saw this one. This one made me laugh literally out loud. We want to be the Ferrari for France. And it's like, bro, what are you saying? Like,
they've been trying to do that since Ligier, and it's never worked out. Let's be real.
Exactly. It's like, come on, man. Like, just have some realistic expectations, and you might actually get somewhere. Like, it just feels like it feels like history's just going to keep repeating itself every 2 to 3 years. Like, they're just going to keep doing the same thing until they eventually end up leaving, or the team just folds. Like, or they're just going to be stuck as a midfield team for the rest of existence.
Team France curse, because as we said, we had I think it was Ligier or Larousse were trying to do that, and then when the Prost took over with the Prost team, the idea was to get French engines in Peugeot, French drivers, and have it be the French national country and have France back it. But then it went to toilet, France backed out, and now they're kind of redoing it again, and it's the same thing is happening. They do have something there that looks pretty solid and gets a 4th or 5th in the constructors, and then it just completely falls apart as it tries to be more ambitious than that.
Yeah,
it's like the last 30 years, it's the same cycle repeating for the French squad or whatever it is. Different people, but still.
Yeah, definitely.
Maybe, I don't know. There's a lot to. They do have a very unique structure. Other places like the race and that are doing their reviews on Alpine, go into it in very good detail, more than we could. But they do have a unique structure, and it just doesn't seem suited for modern day F1. When we see other teams like Stroll, who has a defiant leader, come in, put some money down, give it a few years, and look what happens here, right? So. What's going to happen? Again, see the second half of the year, see who actually turns up. But you wouldn't haven't got a lot of confidence on them, unfortunately.
No, unfortunately not. I'd love to see them do well.
At least the drivers are doing okay.
Yeah. When they're not double DNFing, I mean, a lot of that's not their fault, but like, they feel like they've been a little bit unlucky this season with their results. But that team management structure, whatever it is just it's not really helping them at the moment. So, but I guess we'll have to wait and see. I really do want to see them do well, particularly Gasly. I'm a real big fan of Gasly, so I don't want to see him, after all the fucking years he spent at AlphaTauri and Red Bull being basically shafted there for ages. It's like he finally
his big move.
Finally made it out and made it to Alpine, which is where everyone sort of expected him to go, being the French driver. And I just don't. I really just want him to do well. I want him to be happy at a team that actually wants the best for him and where he can succeed and thrive and all that. But we'll see. We'll have to wait and see. Maybe this is the restructure that they need to finally do well. But somehow I'm a little doubtful. I mean that was it. I mean, we could talk about the other teams. I don't know if you had anything specific on like Ferrari or
not much to go into that much.
Yeah.
I think there was one liner saying with Logan Sargent.
Yes.
My only opinion on that is to say it feels like we're back to classic Williams, where they have one really strong driver and one driver that's struggling a bit. They'll give him a year, and if he falters a bit, then they'll get another rookie in or someone else in. I feel like that's the same here.
Yeah.
Give him the second half of the year. Don't kick him out like De Vries, but don't be surprised if he gets the boot if he's not performing.
Yeah.
I think that's all I was gonna.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess to
as
add
much
on,
as I do enjoy the Team America memes on Twitter every weekend, I do enjoy seeing the eagle flying over the DNF exploding. I quite enjoy those videos.
I mean, the only other point I'll make on that is I think James Vowles running that team, I think he's basically like they seem pretty supportive of giving Sargent, like, unless he completely flops this year, I think they're pretty supportive of giving him a second year as well. Like they seem to be, at least in terms of his pace, his consistency obviously is not there, but when he is driving well, his pace is apparently okay. So like they're probably just giving him a bit of time.
There's been enough signs there to say there's something there.
Yeah, and like he is obviously coming in as, I don't know, maybe he is that token American driver that they need, but he's not a bad driver. Like he's done well in junior formulas and this as well. So like I think there is potential for him to do well. He's maybe being a bit overshadowed by the fact that Albon's just absolutely flying at the moment, killing it. But I think like I said, with James Vowles heading that team, I think Williams potentially could. I think they're probably the team I'd be like low key watching out for, sort of longer term as well. Like over the next 2, 3, 4 years, I think Williams they could potentially sneakily make their way back to sort of the front, like the top 5 teams. I think for sure, top 4 teams even. I could get more into that, but that's like I said, that's going to be over a long period of time. I think they finally actually got a good foundation to start making some gains. But anyway, if that's all you've got, we can start going on to a lot of the silly season talks and a lot of the future news. But let's talk about what we think the lineup will look for 2024. That's obviously a lot of talk when you get to the mid-season and there's not a lot of news around, and drivers' contracts are starting to get signed. It's all about the talk for what's the lineup going to look for 2024. And for the most part, I think most seats have been, basically signed and filled. There's a few out there that are still a bit of a question mark. The one that all the news stories try and play up is the fact that Hamilton hasn't signed with Mercedes yet. He's going to stay with Mercedes. I'm not even going to talk more about that. If you think he's going to be moving anywhere else, you're an idiot. He's signing with Mercedes for next year, so shut up. Let's move on to the ones that actually matter, though. Neither of the Haas drivers, I think, have signed a contract for next year. And this one, I think, is actually a little bit of an interesting one. We had Hülkenberg come in this year, and he's done exceptionally well. I'd be very surprised if Hülkenberg doesn't keep his seat for next season. Magnussen, I feel like, he came in and completely blew Mick Schumacher out of the water, and that's obviously one of the reasons why Mick was booted in favor of Hulkenberg. And Hulkenberg, it feels like, has just done, not that Magnussen's done badly, but it feels like he's been completely overshadowed by Hulkenberg now. So I'm curious whether or not you think Magnussen is under threat at all. I'm not saying that he will get the boot, but do you think there's sort of a bit of a question mark there, or what are your thoughts on that?
There is, of course, a little bit, but Gunter, who's never afraid to pull a punch, has been pretty forward in any chatter, interviews, etc., to say that he's happy with Hulk's work, but he's also very happy with Kevin's work. Now, I don't know if that's because maybe it's a car or development or otherwise thing, or bigger picture, I don't know, but you feel like even with Mick, or even with Grosjean in the past, or anyone like that, even Gutierrez, when I think back to them at the start of Haas, it didn't take long for Gunter and management to, midway through a year when someone wasn't performing, to, pretty openly say, they've got a few more races before we lock down what the hell we're doing here, right? Yeah. And he's been the complete opposite of that. So, whether these are still two drivers that they just want some stability, and maybe from a development perspective, they're still really happy with the both of them. It could be that, again, almost not like the Stroll thing, but similar, where performances don't matter that much, right? Then, it's not a bad thing. And as I say, there could be other factors that they're keeping him on, or just to have some of that stability into next year. But irrespective of that, if these performances keep going how they are, and Hulk keeps outperforming him consistently, as in the only one getting Q3, the only one getting a point or two, of course it's going to come up. But Haas are a team where you'd hear it from, you hear it from the horse's mouth before anyone else, right?
True.
If they had any thoughts on it. And until they do, I don't have any concerns about it. As an onlooker, do I think, they should chuck him out because he's doing bad? I don't know. I think Magnussen's not like a rookie like Mick or someone like that, right? He's been here a long time. He's had, an early career, then a return. So I think they know Haas know what they're talking about if they're not concerned about his performance, and I trust that, So I'm still interested to see how it goes. But you're right. In a I guess talking about the rest of the grid, in a grid where there's a few things open, but really, we've talked about Sargent, I guess, and that's the only other real one, because the other one, De Vries, has already been done ahead of time.
Yes.
So everywhere else, you kind of go, well, that's the only real spot to talk about. Yeah. But I don't. Sometimes we've talked about, we don't see any change, and then 4 seats change, right? But I just don't see any unless, a driver suddenly out of nowhere completely drops the pin and then they have to get rid of them. So outside of that exception, it's hard to see anyone really for at least for the end of, this year, start of next year, at this stage, from what we've shown, from my experience. Do you have any other observations?
Yeah,
or?
So I do. I mean,
Okay.
I'll get the easy ones out of the way. Both AlphaTauri drivers are expected to continue. Obviously, Ricciardo's shown enough to get that, spot for 2020. Yeah. Actually, we can. I'm gonna come back round to that. But we'll.
Okay.
Obviously, we've got the Sargent potentially under threat at Williams. I don't. Even if he does, if he completely shits the bed and they really need to get someone else for next year, I don't see that happening. But let's say it does. You look at the Williams driver academy, they do have a few drivers. In fact, they've got 5 drivers. One of them is Jamie Chadwick, who if they would have given her a go in Williams F1, they would have done it already. So
they would have done it already.
Yeah, and then the other 4 drivers are all in FIA Formula 3 at the moment, and there are some really, really quality F3 drivers in there. Colapinto is one in particular that has been touted as one of those sort of real junior star drivers. Zach O'Sullivan, I think, is doing quite well as well in F3, but they're all F3. You don't really see someone jump from F3 straight to F1 unless they're an absolute gun, and none of them are really showing that that's what they are at the moment. So they don't have anyone from their academy to throw in there. So even if they do just keep Sargent, even if he has sort of maybe underperformed, quote unquote, compared to what they expected, I don't really see any reason for them to sort of push him out for next year. Like even keeping him for next year, develop the car, and if he performs, then awesome. And if he doesn't, then it's like, okay, maybe you've got a couple of, your F3 drivers that have then moved up to F2. Yeah, exactly. So like, it just seems like Sargent. Everything points to Sargent keeping that seat for 2024. I don't really see what other option they have unless they want to throw someone else outside their program in there, which they could. Williams, they don't have to go with someone from their academy, but then they've got someone they've pulled from the Red Bull Academy.
That's
where
our album came from.
Yeah, it's like, who knows? But so I expect Sargent to continue for next year. We've talked a little bit obviously about Stroll, whether or not he will potentially go in or out, but I think if they're going to put someone in, Drogovic is probably up there as their best bet. Like you say, someone more junior to go in there. They're not going to pick anyone, I think, directly from the grid unless they are a young gun.
Correct.
The only other team I thought was possibly a bit interesting, we've got Alfa Romeo, which is becoming Sauber.
Kind of been in a bit of a shadow, right?
Yes, yeah. I mean, they're
but still working towards this Audi plan in, when is it?
2026. Yeah, so it's becoming.
Yeah, so not too far away.
Yeah, so it's becoming. Alfa Romeo have they're dropping the Alfa Romeo name, becoming Sauber for next year and 2025, and then they're going to Audi 2026. There's rumors that apparently Alfa Romeo are becoming the title sponsor of Haas. I don't know how true that is.
I did see that.
don't really know what that's about, but anyway, Alfa Romeo at the moment, or Sauber, I guess, it's real interesting in the sense that, and this is a story we've talked about last year as well, or even the last couple of years.
Yes.
With Théo Pourchaire. And the problem with Pourchaire is that the moment he's leading the F2 championship, he's the Sauber Academy driver. In fact, I think he's the sole Sauber Academy driver.
Yes.
And he's been touted to get the F1 seat. In fact, as of, I think, this year, a lot of people put him in that seat over Zhou. At the moment, I don't really know what to think of Alfa Romeo, because it feels like Bottas and Zhou, every weekend they feel like they sort of flip-flop who's faster, who's the better driver on that weekend. But the Alfa at the moment it's just not a quick car, so it's kind of hard to know whether it is entirely driver performance, or if it is just them just trying different things with the car, just trying to get the most performance out of it, and maybe one driver goes the wrong way, and that's like, I don't really know with that team at the moment. It's just kind of a bit confusing, but I feel like they could be thrown a bit of a curveball with Pourchaire coming in. If he does win the F2 championship, what do? Do they push one of them out to get Pourchaire in? Like, I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but
oh boy, good question.
Yeah.
It feels like both drivers are still fine to be placeholders.
Yeah,
but you still don't see either of them. To be fair, Zhao does seem to be on a bit of an upward trajectory.
Yeah,
and I think if that continues towards the end of the year, it raises his credibility to be someone that, I guess, who's their new team leader? I can see his face. I don't know his name.
Andreas Seidel?
Andreas Seidel. I can see Seidel, obviously. He's going to have to make, a big part of that decision. So if Zhao can continue to impress him, I can see where he could continue to stick around. It's really hard for Bottas. I wouldn't say he's really dropped in performance, but certainly Zhao has been getting better to the point where he was behind Bottas, and now he's kind of equal or a little higher.
Yeah. Where
Bottas has remained a little stagnant. Which, as I say, I don't think either of them is bad. And if this team continues as is forever, then they can almost just sit on them until they have some opportunity come through. Either because Teo smashes it out, and then they say, right, we've got to move one of you over. Probably Bottas, if Zhao continues to improve. But there's this whole thing of saying, but this is for Audi, right? And when we talk about Audi, they're talking about wanting people like Norris, like Sainz, like big established guns, So then you say, well, but if they can't get that, do they need someone that they can then have here for at least 2 years to really cook and drive into a massive talent, and is Teo that driver?
Yeah,
so
that's a good point, actually.
Because of course Teo, even when he was coming into F2 out of F3, everyone was saying this guy is going to be here in F2 for a year and he's going to move up for sure. And you wouldn't even say, I guess, last year when that happened, that team and their drivers necessarily excelled. It's just that Teo, I guess, underperformed, and the drivers in the team were doing good enough, and Teo wasn't doing good enough to justify the switch over,
there was
right?
there was a lot of driver errors as well with Teo.
So you see the same thing for this year, right? If he could crush it out for the rest of the year, then you can see an argument where they may need to drop one of them, especially because they want to see if he's fit for representing a brand like Audi, which they're seeing as a massive, thing. They need at least, a young gun rookie that's amazing plus a seasoned veteran, right? That's why they're talking about people like Norris or someone to his level, that they know will be consistent and can, do amazing things for them.
Sure.
So again, it's a cop out. It's something that needs the year to play out.
Yeah.
If both their drivers improve and Teo does well but doesn't smash it, then they may delay it for another year, right? And say we're going to spend another year to figure it all out, and then we'll have our rollout plan for testing for Audi and then for Audi, But if both drivers absolutely drop a stinker, or even one of them does, then sure, they could say, right, Teo, get in there, or someone else, who knows, right? They could pick up another rookie. There's no reason why they can't,
Yeah.
Maybe Ferrari will want someone and say, hey, you're still affiliated with us. Can we pay you to put a Ferrari driver in our seat? That could still happen, right? So I didn't think about them, but yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
What do you think? I think I've talked a lot about them. What do you think?
I genuinely don't know. I'm very much see how the rest of the year plays out for sure.
It's another one.
The only scenario that I don't know what happens is both Zhou and Bottas improve a lot. They've improved incredibly for the second half of the year.
Nibbling more points.
And Porsche wins the F2 championship. Yes. Then what do they do?
You've got another Piastri situation.
Yes, that's what I'm thinking. Is he just goes
degree,
in,
but still
full-time test and reserve driver. Just give him as much time as possible. Really, really pushing that Sauber forward.
Almost similar to a Dragovic position.
Yeah,
as well. Another one.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean that's. Yeah, it's real hard, like you say.
Keep tabs on this, ladies and gentlemen. It will come up.
Yeah, so it's definitely. I think it requires the second half of the season to play out before I can sort of make any sort of judgment. It's so hard to tell at the moment.
And teams aren't forced to sign everything by the middle of the year as well. There's a reason that for cases like these, like Haas has traditionally waited until the end of the year to sort it out. So they've got all their cards in front of them.
Yep. Yeah.
So there's no reason they can't do it, but. Yeah, it will be interesting to view as a bystander what goes on.
Yep, for sure. All right, well that was it for the 2024 lineup stuff. So let's get into more general newsy things. The most recent one that I've got, the FIA is rumored to be contemplating banning DRS in qualifying, and this seems like a target on Red Bull, doesn't it? Just a little bit, maybe. What are your thoughts?
Yes, it does. In saying that, I think we both quite enjoy Red Bull more than other dominating teams in the past. I guess just because of the generation we grew up in and watching in, right? We grew up with them as the underdogs, so therefore, we don't see them as the dominance of the Ferrari or the Mercedes, from the past, where it was like, do anything you can to get them out of that top spot, right? There's two sides to the coin, I guess. The FIA, if they see a chance to make a change, which may not necessarily have good grounds, but they could just do, and they can make up some excuse to do.
Yeah.
They've done that a lot in the past, right? They've found some secret, to do with a certain way that, the F duct was implemented or something with the suspension or the tires when Ferrari was dominant. They were very quick to, make some sort of cover-up story that they knew would affect the top team the most.
Yeah.
This feels exactly in that bucket. Mm-hmm. There is a side to say that it's true. Why do we bother having DRS in qualifying? Because it doesn't do anything.
That was my other
That's fair, but then you're also saying, well, why turn it off if it's not a safety risk? If there's no reason to not turn it off, you're changing the rules mid-season, and DRS isn't a bespoke part, right? If it was a bespoke part, then every team's kind of affected,
Yeah.
But this isn't a just bespoke part. To your point, as you said, Red Bull, and they've even said they don't understand how their rivals don't have as good a DRS because they seem to think it's pretty straightforward.
Yep.
But yes, this does seem to come out not triggered by anyone else. It's not like a team has gone, oh, there's this justification to not have it, and everyone's gone, at least there's a safety concern there, or some other concern, a cost concern, an environment concern, any of those you could argue, right? But it does fall under that almost nice blanket for FIA where they could go, ooh, we could hand shift some reason for it, just say, we don't need it, it overcomplicates things, blah, blah, blah. But it's a winner that it does turn down that Red Bull, something that they're quite good at, just a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So, an interesting one. We haven't had an FIA case like this, in a while where something's conveniently worked out like this.
Yeah.
So it's almost, it's a bit cheeky. I'm curious to see how the conversation plays out.
Yeah, I haven't heard, that was, a week or two ago now, I sort of heard about that. I haven't heard anything since then. I think maybe once the season starts back up, there might be, it's one of those that'll either just completely dissipate into nothing because it was just a straight up rumor that, maybe it was mentioned once and
an off comment someone made, right?
Yeah, exactly. Or if we do hear about it, I think in the next couple of races it will probably come back up, particularly if Red Bull do keep that DRS advantage as they have been. I think it will come up again, but we'll just have to wait and see. I haven't heard anything since then, so it's kind of usually with those sort of rumors, it feels like they just sort of peter out, like it's sort of starting to do. So, but
it also doesn't feel like airless crap.
Yeah,
I'm there's some validity here. I can see how this might come up.
Yeah,
so I'm very interested.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see. I guess the next one I had here is this is sort of an ongoing conversation, but it's the Pirelli tires, the non-blanket tires. They're still being criticized by all the teams and drivers.
It's taken a bit of a U-turn, hasn't it?
Yeah, so they've now next year they were planning on completely removing the tire blankets. They were sort of pushing towards that. They reduced tire blanket temperatures for this year. Drivers are still already not happy with that. But they're basically just flip-flopped and said, actually, no, next year we're not going to ban them, you can keep them. And I don't think they're making any changes as far as I can tell, at least not yet. Maybe they're still in conversations to think about some, have some talks about what they're going to try and do with that. But we'll have to wait and see. The only other points I had, which, again, this kind of older news, but, talking to other tyre manufacturers that have been part of F1 in the past, Michelin have basically said they're not interested in coming back to F1. They just hate how F1 relies on the tyre degradation to improve the show. So, which I think is a valid criticism, I think. They it's true that Pirelli, it's in saying that, that's something I've been a proponent of, is the tire degradation does make it a little bit more interesting. Pirelli have been pretty good at that. It does make pit stop strategies more interesting, but in saying that, if you can just get closer racing in general, then you don't need the whole pit strategy thing. And I think F1's sort of slowly trying to work towards that, with obviously the new fundamental design changes and things. This is a whole podcast length conversation that you could have because it ties into so many other things. But the bottom line is Michelin aren't interested in coming back. The interesting one though is apparently I don't know if this was a rumor or if it was actually confirmed, but Bridgestone, were applying for a 2025 contract for F1 as well. So
I do know a fair amount about this.
Oh, you do?
So I can cover it if you want.
Yeah,
I guess on both
over.
of these topics. So I guess we'll finish off this one. So we talk about the tyre tender. So I think it might be every year or every 2 years or semi-regularly, right? Mm-hmm. There's a contract that goes around where, yes, Pirelli has been the sole supplier for a number of years now, as well as for a number of the top-tier sports, right? But they still put out a tender to say, if anyone else wants to supply, hey, we're interested. Let us know. We can have a look at it. And years go by, no one is interested. But essentially, it has come up where Bridgestone has put in at least an expression of interest, or to say, hey, give us some more information. We're seriously considering this. I guess there's one big factor that comes out of this, which is to say, everyone's saying tire war ? Is the big one. I will preface this right now to say that the race has done an insanely good podcast on this topic.
Right.
When this came up, They go through it. They go through the history of tires, how Bridgestone came and went, how Pirelli came in. It is amazing. It may sound like it's boring because it's on tires and tire construction. I remember the drive I did when I was listening to it. It was that good. I was enthralled by it. They do an amazing chat on this. So if you want more information, listen to that podcast. If we can, we'll have to link it. It's very good discussion. But essentially, it's very interesting because, we used to have Tire War, Bridgestone, Michelin, big part of the Ferrari, Ferrari being one of the two, was one of the almost the sole suppliers, right? You have almost like an engine where you have like a factory tire team, and then you have sub-suppliers that just have to go along with it. I guess the difference with having a sole supplier now and the difference with Pirelli is Pirelli don't make their own rules. They don't just say, oh, we just try to make a good tire to sell our brand. They get a very specific direction that constantly evolves from the FIA to say, this is how we want the races to play out. Because of effects from the tire, your tire needs to do that. And Pirelli has gotten a lot of slack, which you think is interesting because Pirelli are here to sell their tires, and most of the talk is about how the tires are crap, are shit or whatever, right? You think that's not going to make you sell tires. But Pirelli still say no. The fact that they're out there, people have enough awareness to know that, they're not making the best tire, they're making a tire to the sport, etc. That's why they're in here, and that's why they still get sales. Which is why the other teams often have said they haven't been interested. The other teams, by that I mean the other tire suppliers, where they've said, we don't want that criticism, we don't want that stress, we don't have to make tires to a specific T, right? But Bridgestone do seem to have come up, and they do see some value with how big F1 is growing to almost try get their name in there, because they see that Pirelli being in, this, and as well as with WEC, which I'll get into with the blanket tires, because that does wrap into WC as well in the future. They've seen that actually that does generate a lot of market value, even if it seems like they're doing a bad job. But all that means for a tire war is you can't really have a modern day tire war in F1 because the prior tire war, there was a lot less rules and a lot more flexibility where you could really try to actually produce a tire that would last, that would be durable, right? You had some basic rules like whether it was ridged or what sort of compounds or material had to be made of, but it was so open book. So reality is we're very unlikely to have two suppliers unless they entirely change the concept of tires. We've run with Pirelli. So it's almost a case of saying, are Pirelli going to be potentially replaced by Bridgestone? And this is a very, real case that they have put forward. As I say, enough where an amazing podcast was made on that, which again, can't recommend it enough, people. So that is it's entirely valid, and I expect to hear a lot more about it. As much as we have, the Andretti talk, this is as big as that, right? Where this is supposed to be a pretty sizable thing. It's still early days, but it is 100% real. And the biggest interest from another tire supplier since Pirelli started, in recent living memory. That's one side of the coin, I guess. Did you have anything to add on that?
No, keep going.
So on the Pirelli side, they've been trying, we've heard for years now, just saying, okay, we're slowly going to pull back the tire blankets. It's partly about energy saving because it uses a lot of heat and energy to go through those tires. And it's also partly about, they say giving the driver more skill, right? If you give a driver a perfect car, that they got a pretty easy job. It's this perception that, you go out on cold tires on, a tough track. It's the driver's skill, on a quality lap to have half a lap to warm it up to get it right. I guess another two factors here is that one, I feel like we're at a pretty good gap right now where the teams and drivers have to work pretty hard to get their tires up into temperature. Where you see some teams do 2, 3, 4 out laps. Some teams do half an out lap. Some cars really getting stuffed if they're in that queue while others can go through it. I feel like from a competitive standpoint and a driver skill standpoint, we're at a pretty good point right now where we don't need to pull that lever further.
Sure.
And the second point is WEC, who actually recently banned tire blankets during part of this year, have actually reverted that because it caused so much chaos and just like disparity and issues that they actually said we've moved on to this too fast, even though WEC have been planning to do this even longer than F1. And they also use Pirellis. It's different cars, but still, I think they actually had this over the Spa weekend was when they first tried to use them without, and there was a lot of issues even after a lot of planning. So I think after both of these factors, that's why they're almost saying, as much as we wanted to try it, where the advantages we wanted to get from this, yes, there is the energy concern, which they could, just use renewable sources to do it.
Yep.
I think we saw it. Was it Austria
Austria,
or somewhere
yep.
where a lot of the energy production they changed to renewable sources, and this is the type of energy which you could do through different sources, right?
Sure.
So that it's not like it's something burning coal to produce tires. It's nothing like that, right? It's something that you could do more sustainably. So the fact that the gain is not that much in terms of saving that energy power output, and if the goal is to make it closer and have more skill for the drivers and teams,
they've already
kind of reached that.
Yeah.
So it almost comes to where they say, let's actually let's sit where we are right now, a nice medium, and medium, get it now?
I get it.
And then
what,
we
not
can
ultra soft
look,
or hyper soft?
Yeah, exactly, hyper soft,
Ooh.
exactly. And then look at actually rebaselining here and just say, what is the target? Is this a good target?
Yeah.
And probably even for Bridgestone coming in, maybe that could change things as well.
Yep.
So yeah, there's a few things there, as I say. I found that topic quite interesting, even though it's just boring old rubber tires.
Yeah, tire chat. That's what they always talk about. Was it Karoon? Or they always talk about how Karoon's like super excited for tire chat.
Yes.
He just groans every time.
I finally get it. I finally understand.
Anyway, I guess we'll stay on tire chat because the next point is technically about tires as well. It's about the wet weather tires, though. And there's a couple of interesting things to talk about here. A few weeks ago, quite a few weeks ago now, they tested those spray flap thingies
At the end of Silverstone.
Yeah, so they tested those and apparently they were shit and didn't really work. There's apparently it was like a very early prototype though, so they're still going to keep trying to see if something like that could.
They said that it
work.
didn't really work, but they got a lot of useful data.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like it was a write-off.
Yeah.
It's that their perception, I guess, of how this would work and how they could cover it didn't work. Yeah. I think they said that a lot of spray, more than they expected, is generated by the floor, which of course they didn't do it. Yes, the diffuser of the floor, which they didn't do anything for.
Yeah. They can't really do anything without affecting the turbulent, the airflow.
So there's a reason they have correct.
Yeah.
There's a reason that they have a committee on this, which they're not saying, they just tried something off the back of a bunch of random suggestions. There was a team that put this together that had a proper first test, and that team said, although it didn't work as expected, we got a massive amount of great data. We're going to start working on potential version 2.
V2.
So, so that was kind of on the spray flap. I know you made a note as well about wet weather tires, and we had a perfect showing of that in. It was in Spa again, right? Where in the sprint race especially, and in other sessions, you had where it was pouring down, and people went, "Oh, it's too unsafe to go out there." And then as soon as the conditions got reasonable, it was intermediates, which of course everyone's going to look at that and say, fair enough, the intermediates is good, but why bother having a wet if you can't run on it?
Yeah.
It amplifies almost and goes pair in pair with this test to say that the wet weather tires do allow you, especially now, to drive in some absolutely disgraceful conditions if you are by yourself.
Yes.
But the problem is the tires is so effective that all that water that the tires are digging into creates such a mess that it's not safe if multiple people are out there, right? So as much as people blame the wets and say, the wets are useless, there's a reason they have this committee now, because I think they're realizing we can actually drive in absolute horrid crap conditions. We could drive in snow. It's just that no one can see a damn thing because that water, the point of it is those tires dig in.
You
and
displace
then
all that water,
It has to go somewhere. Yes, they talk about displacing, liters and thousands of liters worth of water. Right? It's massive amounts of water, which is incredible that can be done. But it's just, where does that water go? It has to go somewhere.
Yeah.
It can't just vanish. The tire doesn't just eat into it and then it goes nowhere. And that's the crux of the discussion, and that's why it links these two. The wet weather tires are useless, but nothing really is to do with the tire. It's just the car. That's why they're looking at how the car could be changed to better deal with that, which is almost nice to see they're taking it in a different direction, rather than just trying to modify the wet weather tire for the 20th time when they realize it's just going to cause the same issue.
Well, you say that, then that was the other thing. It's like they either modify the car with something like these spray flaps to try and reduce the spray. The more recent discussion that's come up is the fact what they're coining the super intermediate tire, which is basically to replace the wet and the intermediate. So kind of how F2 only have the one wet weather tire in terms of...
There's a lot of slower open series do. That's
true. So, and apparently like the tread pattern is like it's actually different than the wet weather tire. Like it gives you there was it was actually I think the race as well, but it was just like one of their short video like YouTube videos, like a 7 or 8 minute video where they were talking about how it's something that is already done in things like F2 and F3. The tread pattern is slightly different, but it allows you to drive in these wet conditions without aquaplaning, but it also displaces displaces some of the water, but it doesn't produce so much spray that it's impossible to see. So it's kind of the problem with Formula One I think they have is the fact that there's so much downforce and like the way the aero works.
It's the nature of the cars, right?
Yes.
They are like the most downforce generating vehicles on the planet.
Yeah.
So you got a less downforce dependent car. It's why sometimes like even endurance races can run in appalling conditions. It's just because the cars are less downforce dependent, more grip dependent, and they just run slower on the tires. They don't have that spray issue, or they can have massive lights. But you're right in that F1 is, even when they're going slow, the spray can just be massive because of the tires, because of, especially this year when we're on ground effect cars, that produces even more spray than we've ever seen. So to your point, there'd still be ways they could explore that. Yes. They could, further reduce, I guess, what do they call it? The mechanical grip, which is more the tire grip, right? Yeah. They could, space it out and have less physical tread on the track, which may even further help with aquaplaning, and mean they have to run slower. But look, it's in the rain. I don't think we mind if they're running slow as long as they can run. You know what I mean? Yeah. A slow car in the rain still looks epic.
Exactly.
It doesn't matter if it's
it's less about like going all out. It's more about the car control thing anyway. It's like if you can keep it on the track.
You see two cars going,
keep it smooth.
Like when we think about Max in 2016 in Brazil, they weren't going that fast, but still some of those moves you think is some of the best ever. And they were pretty slow moves around the outside of a few corners.
Yeah, exactly.
But so certainly, I think you still could make some changes to the tire, but also it's clear they're saying fundamental areas of the car may also need to change, or at least they need to prove to say, to reduce the spray, here's a change for the diffuser would have to make or something like that, right? Yeah. But I think it's almost tires and everything in general they seem to be almost taking a little pause on, rather than just constantly criticizing or reevaluating, to actually go, hey, let's see what we've done here. Let's look at different suppliers, look at different ways to build the tires rather than just make snap decisions. Look at different ways we can build the cars to support the tires.
Yep.
There's plenty of little chatter that's kicking up in that area.
Yeah, and I think it's going back to the previous point we were talking about. I think it's important that they're exploring all these options, like as soon as possible as well. With Bridgestone applying for the 2025 contract as well, this shows that Pirelli are like super committed to being like, we need to try something to improve this. Yes. Like, so if Bridgestone come in and say, hey, we think we've got an idea of how to fix this, and then Pirelli is still sitting there going, oh, we don't know what to do, then it's like they might...
I know what you mean.
Yeah, like it might give Bridgestone a bit more weight to be like, hey, we're gonna give it a go and see how it goes. So I think it shows that Pirelli are still very committed to Formula One, and wanting to improve that.
This Bridgestone thing hasn't come up because Pirelli are thinking about pulling out and F1 need a backup. Pirelli is still 100% focused. Everyone's just surprised this Bridgestone thing has come up.
Yeah.
But you can see how it could just be in favor, right, of the sport, So we'll see how it goes.
Yep. Competition's always good. All right, let's move on because there's a couple of, 2024 stories that I've got here. Actually, no, I've already mentioned that one. That was, Alfa Romeo to become Sauber for 2024. The Alfa rumored to be title sponsor of Haas. I don't know. Do you think that'll be a thing, or do you think that's one of those, like, silly season rumors?
I think Alfa have enjoyed being on the grid, and I wouldn't mind seeing them somewhere else. Yeah, so I could see it, but I don't think it's anything more than them just saying, we could go somewhere like this, but we'll let you know. I think that's where it's at, right? If you had to think of an example, Haas is probably the next best bet logically. True. So that's probably why they've been roped into the conversation.
True. And I think the next big one was with AlphaTauri to be renamed from next year as well.
Yes,
and they're
renamed to what?
Some of the names, like
I have seen a number of names ranging around. It seems like they haven't made up the name of their title sponsor, and depending on that, they may just throw them in as the new team name.
Yes, yeah. I really hope it doesn't become what was the Hugo Boss Racing, F1 Racing or some shit. I'm like, nah, stop.
Well, this also links in because isn't it that Franz Tost, after his long tenure after this year, will actually be stepping down?
He is. Laurent Mekies is coming in for next
Laurent
year.
Laurent Mekies from Ferrari.
Yes,
is coming in.
Yes,
correct.
So
quite a bit of change happening to that team. Still, of course, a sub-junior of Red Bull. They have in the past now and then tried to almost sell it off to, someone that wants to run it separate. This doesn't seem like it's a sale of that kind, although if someone came with a big offer, hey, who knows, right?
No, this seems like the opposite. Like I feel like...
Oh, okay.
Well, I feel like because AlphaTauri sort of went... maybe I'm wrong, but like AlphaTauri, they sort of...
I see what you're saying.
When they became AlphaTauri, they sort of... Not split off, like there was still that Red Bull junior team, but they were sort of
they
were
weren't just
running
copying
their own
the prior Red Bull car.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Where that was quite common.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, I agree with you. I agree with your point. I thought you were going elsewhere, but no I see where you're going.
But obviously they're being told from next year they're going to be following Red Bull as far as the regulations allowed in terms of parts that they can be supplied. They're just going to be given like Red Bull parts. To a point where they're allowed. Like with the parts, obviously, there's certain parts that teams have to make themselves. But if Red Bull are allowed to give them basically like-for-like parts, they're just going to do that. So they're basically bringing him way back in closer after a couple of years where AlphaTauri have sort of not really... They've not really lit the world alight. They haven't really sort of thrived as a team by themselves a little bit. So I think Red Bull are like, hey, we want to bring him back in. If we're going to be using this team to bring juniors in to train them up, they need to be, we want to try and give them a good opportunity and put them in a car that's as close to our car as possible. So that way, if we do want to move them in, hey, you've already got sort of a semi-baseline to work from. So I think, I believe that this is more, them trying to bring the Toro Rosso, AlphaTauri, fucking Hugo Boss Racing, whatever it's going to be called, back into the Red Bull family to hold on to a little bit longer. I don't think it's a selling off at all. I think they're trying to bring it a bit closer to them. So,
I agree, and I think we haven't. I don't know the details of it, but a big part of moving into this cost cap era was to have more. What do they call them? They have the shared or standard parts. Yes. But they also have like open parts or designs, where certain general designs after a few years can be almost like publicly shared rather than always being like very hidden. So I guess it makes sense, or if they're wanting to double down to being a Red Bull B as much as they can, then take advantage of maybe some of those times on designs and licenses and such that are now changing with this new era, and actually go back to operating in that close close partnership as much as they can, as the rules will allow.
For sure.
So it makes sense, but it is also interesting to see a bit of a like the name change. Sure, like it's still Red Bull B in philosophy, so whatever name it has doesn't really
matter.
Matter,
Same with
get some extra coin out of it. Brilliant,
Same as when it was called AlphaTauri as well. It's like doesn't sound like Red Bull at all. Like obviously got Tauri, but like people still know it as the Red Bull B team. So it's like it really just doesn't matter unless Red Bull do sell it, as you say. It just will always be the Red Bull B team. That's just how it is. Yep. So. But
the management change is interesting too. Yeah. I wouldn't say it's because they're making any rash decisions, because of the performance. This team, has always been a team that can, ebb and flow a bit, but due to its structure, unless it does operate completely independently, it's never going to be one that could almost, challenge alongside or hyper close to its sister team.
Yeah.
Well, we've certainly seen it challenge, for sometimes, fourth and fifth in races pretty consistently, and there's no reason it can't go back to that. And especially if they've seen, look, they've made a bit of a rocky start here, they could shortcut it by taking advantage of that relationship and help to catch up a bit, catch up to the likes of those that are Alpine, that are in the middle. They might be trying to jump for next year. So it all makes sense. I don't know.
yeah No, I think that's fair. I mean, I guess points that I didn't really touch on earlier regarding AlphaTauri. I mentioned that I think it's going to be Tsunoda and Ricciardo in for next year, but you mentioned the Red Bull Junior program, how they got a lot of junior drivers, and we've mentioned Perez potentially.
They once again have seemingly the strongest junior lineup because their juniors in multiple areas are doing very well for themselves.
Yes, quite. It's kind of hard for me to know what they're gonna do. Like you said, I think it's definitely one of those that you kind of have to wait to see how it plays out. But you've got Liam Lawson, who's currently P2 in Super Formula. He's like killing it.
He's performing so well over there.
Doing very, very well. You've got there is Iwasa in F2. He's not. He has his moments, but I think he's not doing quite enough.
He's not killing it, but he's still doing well
okay,
enough.
yes,
if you didn't have an alternative, you could do a lot worse.
Definitely, yeah,
a lot worse.
And then obviously you've got the Ricciardo to take the Perez seat story for 2024 as well. And there's the comments from Max coming is like he's open to being teammates with Ricciardo again, saying he never wanted him to leave in the first place. And it's like, okay, that's an interesting thing to say. So, like you say, it's definitely going to have to play out for the rest of this year. For now, I don't really see anything changing for 2024, unfortunately for Lawson. But I think he just, at the moment, just has to focus on hopefully winning that Super Formula, and then, again, maybe doing a Dragovic or what a Porsche might kind of do it, and just sort of coming in.
You feel
as,
like
as
if
a
he does
full-time...
win Super Formula, he'd more be in a Piastri where he's almost destined for the AlphaTauri seat when it does open up, right? Like if someone like Iwasa or any of those F2 drivers had dominated the F2, that would be the only case to put them ahead of the queue of someone like Lawson.
Sure.
But even if you look at Lawson's F3, F2, etc. career, which was still arguably as strong as any of those other drivers are having, Red Bull, as we saw with Gasly and others, does like to put them through this Super Formula program.
Yeah.
And Super Formula every year still gets stronger and stronger. It's arguably, if you do better in that, it's more of a showing than it is to do in F2. Because for Japan, that's a massive series. It has a lot of veterans, a lot of greats. It's very much a spec series as well as much as F2 and F3 is.
Yeah.
And of course, you're in a complete culture change. So if you're coming from a non-Japanese background, if you do well, it shows a lot about your character.
Sure.
And Lawson, from where you still have maybe one or two question marks over his head from more traditional, European series, he's completely eradicated those and shown that he's actually doing super well. So from that aspect, as we say, if someone like Yukio Ricciardo absolutely dunced it, you would see no hesitation to put him in. But if they don't, which at this stage looks to be the case, you'd think they're saying, right, then we'll wait on it because, of course, there's some pretty interesting story to play out. And then whoever that plays out, Lawson would then be next in line to go in there. And then I guess after him, you'd have some of those other juniors which are now showing their way, right? But still, it's this case of the Red Bull system where they seem to have, no drivers in the background, and then they've got too many drivers in the background. And I guess there is another interesting element. I won't go into this too long, but where Red Bull have had the likes of like Mark or Vettel or even DC in their early years, which have kind of come through and shown strength for a few years, but then have obviously tailed off, so they can still have some sort of rotation for drivers. Whereas for Max, he's been here for quite a number of years now,
and he's just going to stay there.
Don't see him doing that Vettel, right? Where suddenly he sees a drop, right? It could be possible, There's a reason that some of the records he's beating are Vettel's records, but it's completely different. It's the culture. Vettel, yes, grew up with that team, but it still felt like a team that's growing with him. While this was like a solid, established Red Bull off the back of that Max has come in, and it's just. Their veins, their blood pumps through each other, right? Unless there's total chaos and destruction in the team, then, that's the only reason Max would ever think about leaving. Similar to, I guess, Hamilton at Mercedes, right? It's the same case there. The difference is Mercedes don't have 10 juniors going through. They have one who isn't really knocking at the door, so they don't have a problem, So, So it's, I was looking at an article earlier today that said it's almost like, it's not a problem Red Bull have, but because they're not doing this even 4 or 5 year rotation of their king driver anymore, it does, still mean that they're growing drivers that are really only going to be for that second seat. And at this case, it seems like they want to be Ricciardo for that second seat, which is even more interesting, right? When you look at, Yuki's there, I still don't think he's material. You never
No.
pick him over someone like Gasly, but I still think he's fine for that AlphaTauri, leadership seat, let's call it, right? The Gasly did it for years where he nurtured and took in new rookies and showed them what to do. You feel like Yuki's just going to be that role for as long as he wants.
Seems like, particularly after this year.
Exactly. But the other juniors, it's like they can come in, but you still think even for Lawson, for Iwasa, for any of the others, even in the next 5-6 years, they're still not ever going to be the number one Red Bull driver because Max is still going to be there. So it's almost, it changes the culture a little bit, So I feel like we're starting to see that, this cycle's like every 6-7 years for Red Bull. We're starting to see a new cycle now where rather than having no drivers, and they're having to borrow from other teams, pull people back that were, previously in their years ago, like Hartley, like Kvyat. There may be next year, the year after, going to have way too many, but, they're just giving them all average seats or they're not sure what to do. Yep. But I think they've got still a little bit, hopefully to see how everyone plays out. And as long as not every driver in their book is killing it, then, it should sort itself out in a pretty logical order. But we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, best case scenario. That's
it is Red Bull. Yeah, we've been through this before. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah. I think the only thing stopping Lawson from definitely getting some kind of seat is super license points. I think is a big question for him because Super Formula doesn't give a lot of super license points. Even if he does win it, for instance, and then maybe sits like 1 year on the sidelines at AlphaTauri AlphaTauri Red Bull before getting the AlphaTauri seat the following year. I don't know what his super license points look like spending. Like,
it's almost the same as that IndyCar problem, right?
Exactly,
like running into.
Yeah, like I think you'd have to give him probably a lot of practice sessions. I think you'd have to probably maybe even put him in another racing program for part of the year as well to make sure he keeps up enough points to get that seat.
Or try to appeal for like veto. I know there is some sort of veto program, right? Or the FIA, you can try to push to get them to override it in, logical faith. You know what I mean? Like if they say, look, he won Super Formula in his first year, he should be in F1.
Won Super Formula, should have won DTM. Like, bro, come on, just give him the seat.
That's very true. He was the driver that basically almost won
should
DTM,
have won it,
which really, that was some controversy now, but that was still very, very competitive.
Yes, yeah. So
that's perfect case for you.
Yeah, I feel like if you're gonna veto anyone, if he does that, surely he would be like the if they don't veto him, they're not vetoing anyone. So
the system is broken.
Exactly.
Everyone's gonna agree to say we need to rewrite this. Even though they already need to, mind you, but that would be the icing on the cake.
Yes, yeah, definitely. But that's all I had to say about that. That's again another big story point that has yet to play out. I feel like a lot of that happening at the moment. But keeping on the 2024 stories, the 2024 calendar dropped as well. There's a couple of interesting changes in that one. The first being that Japan's moved to like quite a bit earlier in the year, which I prefer. I like having Japan a little bit earlier because it means one we can watch on Sunday afternoon and not Sunday night / Monday morning / Monday afternoon. So that's nice. And we get that sort of earlier in the year rather than that being pushed back to later. I don't know how that affects with like weather because I think it was moved to that's Northern Hemisphere. So that's spring as opposed to autumn. It was obviously quite wet the last time we went to Japan. That was, again, another controversial Let me look it up. I want to find out exactly when it was moved to. So it was moved to like April 5th. So it's now directly after Japan. So directly after Australia is Japan, and I think it makes sense now that because we've got China trying to come back onto the calendar for next year. We've now got a run of Australia, Japan, China, and I think this is probably why they've moved it, is to try and keep it.
This is the correct. This is really the culmination of what they've been talking about. They want to do as one of the biggest effectors of their emissions.
Yes.
In terms of that air freight and that air travel. So they've said for a while that they want to have it. So they visit each area of the world almost as its own, little, not little championship, but, little corner. Whereas, right now they go to some sort of logical order, but it does jump back to, some places repeatedly. Whereas it seems like they put down the foot. They said, right, next year we're actually properly putting this in place. So you get the likes of Japan, which is in, this kind of area, very much near the start with the other races that are actually in that area.
Yep.
We've seen places like Azerbaijan move much further back, where it's more in that area of the world as well. So
yeah, that's true. That was the other one that moved.
Yeah, they've been talking about doing this for a long time, and it seems like they've finally gone, right, this is the year to do it.
Yep.
So
Yep.
again, it almost makes it feel more natural, where each weekend you're not sure if it's an early race for us, a late race for us, 2 a.m., 10 p.m. It's almost now going to go more in groups, which, I think is nice for us, but it will make a big difference, I guess, to their goals.
Definitely.
For carbon emissions and everything. And let's be real, it's a 24 race calendar. It's a thick calendar,
it's a
right?
big boy.
So
yeah.
having everything grouped as they can will, of course, make it easier for the teams, the mechanics, less flying, less tax, no nights of sleep on them as well.
Yeah.
So really, I think it's good to use this year to probably say, right, we know we're ramping up, and we're going to, do this big change we've talked about for years now. So It's good to see.
Yeah, definitely. The only one, I'm like looking at this 2024 calendar, the only one that's sort of a bit confusing to me, maybe they just, because of scheduling issues, again, like you say, it's such a big calendar, there's only so much they can do. We go Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, which, by the way, as a side note, they are potentially next year likely to be held on Saturday, the races, due to Ramadan.
Yes.
Which, again, great for us. That's awesome. That means we can watch them.
Fucking mega for
I'm
us.
so happy, because that would mean the first 5 races of the season. We've got Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, which will be on Saturday. Then we've got Australia, Japan, China, which will all be at viewable times for us as well before we go on. The first 5 races.
Content, right?
Oh, my God. They just love Australians right now. It's about freaking time. But yeah, anyway, the side note, I'd be happy if they did that, but I haven't seen anything else on it. I think it was just like talks to do that. Like I said, it was due to that Ramadan for 2024 and possibly beyond. I think it's just where the dates line up. So, but we'll see what happens. Like that'll come up sort of later in the year, I'm sure, or potentially over the season break at the end of the year. But yeah, like the only one we see, like we've got Bahrain, Saudi, so that makes sense. Then move to Australia, Japan, China, and then we go to Miami before going back to Imola. So Miami's a bit of an outlier where that one probably should be with Canada, which is a few races later. So it goes Miami, Imola, Monaco, Canada, Spain. And it feels like you should be able to try and get Miami and Canada in the same sort of times.
There's still ways they could improve it. There may be, local things they've agreed to. So obviously you don't see this as, if you just looked at it in black and white, where I said in terms of time zones and travel, what's the best way to do this? There's still a lot of ways you could compartmentalize this.
Definitely.
But
it still looks a lot better than it has in the past.
Yeah,
definitely.
As we say, this is the biggest change in terms of that general going to each different area, and then we've had in a long time. We've always talked about having like the Europe leg, but all the other legs haven't really been a leg. It's kind of a jump around, where this does feel more like you can talk about different legs, and then still a bit to work out. But I think over time, they're going to continue to make changes like this. So
the American leg is actually like it's very much its own sort of thing now. So like you said, the Asia one we've got, or Oceania Asia, which is Australia, Japan, China. They've got those. Singapore's sort of on its own, but they've coupled that with Azerbaijan, which I think kind of makes the most sense. There's really no other places that couple well with that, so I think they've done that quite well. And then you go Circuit of the Americas, Mexico, Brazil, Las Vegas, and they're all grouped together as well. So, and I think the only other thing you could do is like you could put something like an Azerbaijan closer to Qatar and Abu Dhabi at the end, but then you've still got Singapore there by itself, and then do you want to try and move Singapore up with Australia, Japan? And then it just becomes, I feel like that just becomes a bit too complicated. So
Singapore may have other reasons it needs to happen at that time of year.
True,
as well, right? Later in
they have quite a wet season in Singapore as well, so this is probably the best chance to get the most amount of running. So decent conditions. So all in all, I think it looks like a pretty good calendar. I know it's 24 races. I think I'd be surprised if we get any more than 24. I know a lot of drivers, teams, people have been outspoken that 24 is like the max, and if they had any more than 24, then they need to have like second teams for like the B teams for the F1 teams, so that way they could rotate.
FIA have said the maximum they ever want to support in the meantime is 25, right?
Yeah.
Which they could maybe squeak in somewhere, but they've said any more than that, they need a general, entire restructure on how they do things to make it possible. Like a B team and mechanics, etc., as you say. So.
Yeah, for sure. But no, I think very positive, and looking at having a real good look at that calendar, I'm pretty happy with it. But let us know your thoughts in the comments as well. I mean, there's still so many tracks that I know they want to get to. Like there's still the South Africa that they want to try.
Continents, and regions they want to get into as well.
So I don't know what they're talking about. The Madrid one. There was talks of, do they want to try and get back to Portugal or Turkey, like these tracks that came
South
up.
South Africa or Argentina.
Argentina. Yep. What was the other one? There was one that was for Colombia.
South Africa. Yeah. They were talking about a lot.
Yeah, I think Colombia came up before the Madrid one came up. I think it was Colombia. Like they're obviously in talks. They still want the second China one as well. Like when they go back to China,
yes.
They're obviously having a lot of these talks, but whether or not they're gonna go through, I think the South Africa one.
It's in a better spot where they were 10 years ago, where they were struggling to get new places that wanted to take them on. It's nice. It's a good problem to have when they have too many places that want to actually host the race. I mean, we saw that transformation even for Melbourne, where it was looking pretty dire. It was losing a lot of money, and now they've completely revamped the track and signed an extremely long contract. Everyone's saying, we're very happy here. We're actually making money. This is fantastic for Melbourne. And everyone else is going, oh, we want to do it now too.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. No, I think it's very positive signs. It's good to see that Formula One, at least financially, is in a very, very good position.
Healthy, yeah,
very healthy. So
it's done well to get out of COVID. We haven't looked at that bigger picture, but when things look dire in COVID, it's doing well. The teams and all that
100%.
Seem to be pretty happy. I guess. Hey, if you don't have another topic leading into teams that are happy in other teams, what a good segue.
Yep. Yeah. So the next point that I had here is you heard about Andretti obviously trying to apply from 2026. How about High Tech? High Tech, that F2, F3 team and other series. Yeah, they've applied to enter F1 from 2026, along with Andretti as well. And the early reports or early rumors are that both applications are set to be approved as well, which would mean we go back to having 12 teams on the grid. That seems awesome, and I think High Tech is that'd be a real awesome one in particular, because then you'd have like a straight direct, F3, F2, F1. You have High Tech. It's not like Ferrari have. They have some sway in Prema or, things like this. It's like, no, they have a team in Formula One. So if you can get a spot, I feel like that gives if you get a drive on High Tech in Formula 3, Formula 2, and you can, show your worth there, then you can basically get this direct route into Formula One, through that team. I guess
it depends if they plan to continue those, right? They may say, actually, we need all our resources on the F1, so that's when they may... cut off some of those ties. In a best case scenario, they don't need to though, and you're right. They actually have that direct link up, which we haven't seen in some time. You know, I think they used to have some link up. Like I think Lotus used to run like an F2 when they had a kind of F1 and something like that. But it would be unique to see. But of course, the Andretti thing has been the main topic over the past 2 years, I guess, and it's where a lot of the discussions come up, both from the Andretti side, who are trying to show that they basically have everything to go, and then we've actually seen how the culture within F1 has changed a bit, where they've been very resilient to that change, where even though they have this rule where yes, you can enter, but you need to pay out a fee to basically compensate the other teams who are going to lose some base revenue because it's being split between more teams. Teams starting to say, well, that's different, we should up it. There are other factors that are now new as of the last 12 months. So that was already the case with one fully suited team. Yeah. And yet now it seems that there is the two. And of course, Andretti didn't just come in and were knocking and trying to get any chance. F1 did launch a proper tender process. I think Andretti showed some interest just before then. So they, of course, submitted when it actually came out. But, F1 did say they received, a number of different proposals that they would go through and veto through. And as you're saying, the recent reports seem to be these two have gone through and are being very much seriously considered.
Yeah.
Which isn't just one, but two extras potentially.
Yeah.
When for, I'm not too sure, but this isn't kind of, I guess, a new process. We haven't had a process to try and get new teams since, a while ago, and this is under a completely different form of F1. It's an actual, cost cap controlled F1, which is basically the first time this has really happened in this degree. So, I think maybe a bit unknown on how things progress from here, but the fact that it seems to have progressed thus far is exciting, and similar to the circuits, shows that there is an appetite, there is a desire. We've had all this Russian circuits come through that we can't fit. We had all that talk on engine suppliers, which still, has kind of bubbled down now, but there was, things that came out of that from Audi and, entities like Porsche which might have dropped off, but they still had strong interest, and there's no reason those discussions aren't. Exactly. Yeah. Brilliant one. Ford, very good. There could be others that are going to kind of come up, right? There's no reason why they couldn't if that proves to be fruitful. So it shows that everyone's in a very healthy place. I think the teams are all fair enough, saying, look, we've finally reached a great balance. Let's be careful we don't upset the balance, right? Yeah. Understandable. They've finally got stakeholders that are happy with it. They've got to make them happy, but F1 also needs to ensure that it grows in all aspects, not just tracks or manufacturers, but if it can, the teams as well, right? Because ultimately, the more cars you got on track, the more action you're going to have, the more, everything.
Definitely,
I took your thunder a bit there.
No, that's fine.
I'm just excited.
Yeah,
I'm very excited about this.
No, it's good. I'm very much excited, and like you say, particularly with Andretti, it feels like every time, you have Toto obviously as being the very outspoken one, but a lot of the a lot of the teams and not so much drivers, but definitely the team management have basically come out and said, like, every time they come out with some kind of comments, like, oh, no, this is the reason why we can't have it. Andretti's been like, okay, no, that's fine. No, we're good. Like, oh, no, but they're this. And it's like, oh, no, that's fine. We've got that sorted as well. And it's just like, no, they've thought about it. Like, I don't know how they could, it just seems like they have everything ready to go whenever they need to.
And that's the job of the FIA, right? The FIA, fair enough, is going to take into consideration, general issues the teams are raising. Yeah. And as we say, the teams are trying to cover their brand. But, if I put a 10-year out and given a checklist and you hit all those check marks, there is no reason why then it shouldn't progress.
Yeah, exactly. All those
check marks that everyone at the time set out for. It's not fair that you suddenly go,
exactly.
Sorry,
yeah, you agreed to all these and you signed that thing. The bloody was it the Concord Agreement or whatever they call it?
It'd be some yes. I think that's long gone, but there'd be some form of that. Yes.
Yeah, like that. Yeah, so like that you signed all those. You can't just be like, oh no, we need to change it again now because X, Y, Z. It's just like, well, no, you signed it, so it's like a contract. It's like if you sign a,
and that's why it's in the FIA's hands, right?
Exactly,
that's why they're the ones that actually have to review it and make the decision.
So it's like, you sign a work contract. It's like, actually, no, I don't want to do. I don't want to do this specific task or this type of job where I'm working. And it's like, well, you don't get to choose that because you already signed the contract.
It's like, well, we can talk about it, but this is still what you signed and reviewed and said you're okay for.
Yeah,
so ultimately, we make the last decision here based on what you signed, buddy.
And as you say, the signs are looking very positive for both teams. And from what I've seen, it looks like both teams are looking sort of 2026. Andretti potentially, I think they were initially looking 2025. I don't know if that's still the case.
Trying to get a year head start on those bigger changes that are going to happen in 2026.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm not entirely sure if that's still the case. There's been less sort of immediate news about Andretti. That's again just sort of an ongoing thing, but we'll definitely have to wait and see. So, but signs are good. We might go back to having 12 teams again. That would be very interesting. And who knows what drivers come in for both those teams as well. That's the other thing. So Andretti obviously, do they want to try and snag an Indy driver and an Alex Palou who's just been sued by McLaren. That's a whole thing too.
I was going to say there's a whole bit of people making joke videos about suing F1 contracts, all sorts from there. That's been a good silly season. Yeah. But save it for a future IndyCar podcast. Get big enough to surely cover that type of news.
yeah, I'll have to start watching it first. Anyway. But like the very last point that I had that I did want to mention as well, the F1 Academy.
Which is a good one to end on. Yeah. The F1 Academy.
Really, really good. They started it this year. It's the all-female feeder series, which is run by Formula One, like the Formula One team.
Correct. It's the spiritual successor to the W Series. So Correct. They had the W Series for a few years, which was almost at like an F3.5 level, I believe.
Yeah.
And it was kind of running alongside F1, but it was like a separate thing.
Yeah, run independently.
And they did a good step where they started actually having that on some of the race weekends. Yep. But they would, I think, like at Austria and some others, they would be there at the same time. But W Series kind of fizzled out a bit, and in its ashes, I guess it's still FIA, but F1 in particular, has come out and they've actually, they've had this F1 Academy thing this year, which is, I think it's scoped down a little bit in terms of grid size, but
there's 5 teams, 15 drivers.
Correct. Yeah. Yes. And it's a similar thing where it's only female drivers, but it's a lot more tightly managed directly by, I guess, the same board, that runs kind of F1.
Yep.
So they've been running that this year. They've been, doing some races on it so far the past couple of months. And the evolution of that, which I guess is what we're talking about here, is that almost every F1 team will be, I don't want to say forced, but they will have at least a single driver that they are actually fully supporting, as if they do for a junior driver from F2, F3, etc.
And have the liveries.
And that also means that car will be covered in their livery, and I think they're also moving to have those races again on the actual F1 weekend.
Every single one.
Right now, where they're... Yes, so it is every single race will actually be there as well. So that means that, of course, people, fans will get to view it and get exposed to it, but also it puts them even more in the limelight of, the idea of this isn't just to do it for a bit of fun, right? The idea is to actually get, I guess this running for a few years, so then you get some new talent of women coming through going, hey, I'm not just trying to pay out a ton to try and show up in F4 and get through, right? Actually, could go through F1 Academy, duke it out with other women, and if you're a young driver, try to actually show yourself up against the more experienced women, and then you've got, the public seeing you, the F1 team seeing you, and then it's an easier bridge for them to get into the sport, right? As girls.
Yep, definitely.
I think it's a great what do you call it? Advancement on the W Series, which I think has been fantastic so far, but probably reached its
and I think
potential.
We had the funding wise, I think they sort of ran out. Yeah,
fizzled out a bit. Yes, they had the same. Jamie Chadwick impressively did very well, but again, if that
Alice Powell really I think did quite well as well. So
correct. Yeah. Yes, so they did get a few names out of that, which was good to get people actually talking about that. But it still didn't result in much more than a test and reserve, which I think some teams did. Yes, they were doing it to evaluate them, but I think also doing it to try and support them, but not necessarily at as a stronger level as they would potentially another junior on pure performance. But the more things we have like this means that more girls, I guess the idea is they're going to enter at the grassroots, right?
Exactly.
Where right now you have 98% of kids karting are boys, right? Then you actually change that split, you get a lot more girls into it, and then there's actually, even more ways for them to show their talents in the next few years as well.
Yeah, so, well, I think it's interesting that we're talking about it now, because the comparison that I'm going to try and make is, recently we had the Women's World Cup with Australia as well, making the semi-final and becoming the most watched sporting event in Australian history. Or the most watched TV event in Australian history, which is incredible, and that's
which is fantastic,
which is awesome. And obviously there's all these to go on a slight segue, but you have the players from the Australian women's team talking about how they didn't even when they were growing up there were no women's soccer teams or football teams that had to play with the guys. It's like they just didn't have a choice. You had to do that. So, and I feel like this is the foundation for them, for the younger girls to be inspired to then sort of go into it, which then brings the interest, which 100%. Then brings the the found like that's sort of how it works. And I think they have, particularly with the F1 Academy, they have that W series to, at least that's the real base foundation that gave them the idea that, okay, this is something that we really need to focus on. You had outspoken people like, your Hamiltons and your Vettels, and, who were really being like, hey, we need this, is something we really need to pursue, referencing the W series. And it's really awesome that Formula One has stepped up to take over.
Yeah.
And because it is Formula One as well, people who, we sort of, we see a lot of this stuff because we're so into the space, and we watch a lot of the feeder series, but there's a lot of people who only watch Formula One. They don't see all this outside stuff. And the fact that this is now run by F1, they might not have even known W series existed, but now because this is run by F1, it's like, oh, this is something that exists. And it's only going to become more in the public eye, especially now that it's like all the races are going to be at Formula One weekends. Like, it's going to be completely aligned. It's going to have, drivers backed by these Formula One teams. It's going to have the Formula One style liveries. It's going to be, it's
just going to generate that discussion.
Exactly. Yeah. And that can only be a good thing. So, I think this is, particularly this F1 Academy, the way that they're developing it, I think is just going to be an incredible foundation for, it might not eventuate, in the next even 2 or 3 years, but definitely over the next 10, 15 years, I think it could be, you could look back at this and say, yep, this is the reason why we have, 2, 3 female drivers in F1 now. And I think
for sure.
that'd be like an incredible target, considering how male dominant, like you say, it has been. So I think it's really, really awesome.
Couldn't agree more. I think they've done a lot of good space in getting girls like off the track in more of like the garage spaces. They've done a lot of work recently on that. And I think it's a good step to focus more on the driver's side. So it's fantastic to see. Hopefully it continues to be worked on, and we see some real positive benefits from it.
100%. Yeah. Well, that's a great place to end. We don't usually end on a real happy note, so that's
my laptop may be yelling at me that it's low on battery, so a good time to wrap up.
Beautiful. Let's wrap it all up. But like I said, it's real long one. A lot of stuff to talk about that ended up being 2 hours. That's incredible. Thanks for sticking with me, Carl. I realize it's probably quite late. We
haven't had one like this for a while. It's
a long
good
time,
to get some of the details and the off-track content.
I do like doing a lot of the long form podcasts. It's just in terms of, it's just us two both having full-time jobs. The amount of time required to even just find time to record this, let alone edit and then upload on a regular basis, it's just not going to happen. So, but maybe in the future, because I do like these long-form podcasts. I think I generally prefer, because you can get really into the crux of a lot of the topics. But let us know what you think. If there's anything we missed, let us know. I'm sure we missed a lot. There's been so many points, but. Thanks for tuning in. If you happen to make it this far, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatever we're on these days. When you hear or see us next, we'll be doing our preview for the Dutch Grand Prix coming up in less than a week's time now. That's about a week's time. Yes, only Saturday. So it'd be good to get back, and very curious to see how the rest of the season plays out. But thank you again, Kyle. Have a safe flight home, and
shall do.
We'll see everyone in a few days for the Dutch Grand Prix preview. Take care, everyone.
Take care, all.